Hi, this is Robin, and this video is about how to emulate retro photo looks using Photoshop. Every decade from the 1960s through the 1990s had its own still photography looks that tracked to historical, social, and cultural contexts of their times, and to photography technologies of the eras as well. In this part one video, I will show how step by step to simulate photo aesthetics of the 1960s and 1970s using Photoshop. My part two video will cover the retro photo looks of the 1980s and 1990s. Now, keep in mind, our results can't be exact to how images looked in those time periods because film had its own unique qualities that it's virtually impossible to replicate with digital cameras and post-processing. But I think we can capture an essence or flavor of how photos looked in those decades. Now, for each decade, I'll walk through a brief analysis of the general photo look for that decade and then demonstrate a step-by-step Photoshop process to reproduce or at least try to replicate that look. Now, keep in mind and remember, if you want more realistic results, if you're going to try to make retro looks, use era-appropriate subject matter, fashion, hairstyles, backgrounds or backdrops, and props in your photo shoots. I won't cover the details about those kinds of things to consider, nor will I discuss the qualities of the major film types that were used in those decades in my tutorials. I will, however, include a link to the stock photo that I use for the demos in the description below the video, and I'll also include links to other videos that I've published on my PhotoMaker Academy channel. Now, I have two other videos that I think are relevant here. One was how to create and apply custom LUTs, and that's spelled L-U-T. It's an abbreviation for lookup tables, and also how to make color grading templates. So that way, if you create some retro looks following the steps we're going to go through in these two videos, then you can save them and reapply them to other images using the techniques I've mentioned in those other videos. Another tip, if you don't want to go through the various steps that I'm going to be showing here and try to build your own custom looks, you can also try doing a search on Google. How's that? It's a whole new browser on Google for retro filters and retro overlays that will give you the same kind of more retro photo looks. So just a tip if you want to try to look for that as well, or as something to complement what you create. One last little administrative thing. If you are new to my channel or have not subscribed yet and you want to be notified of my future Photoshop workshops, please just click that free subscribe button below the video, as well as the black bell icon that's down there too, to get a single notification from YouTube when I release new content each month. If you are already subscribed, there is no need to click again. You only click once on one video and you are all set for a subscription. So let me pause for just a moment. Be sure I'm all set up here for the demo number one on the 1960s retro photo look and how to achieve it. Okay, so now this will be demo number one, and as I said, I'm going to be showing a 1960s retro photo look and how to achieve it. And what I want to do first is analyze the appearance of some actual 1960s photos. So I have these three samples that I have pulled here for you to see, and I'm going to use them as reference models for what we're going to try to achieve with my contemporary photo that we're going to use as an example. So when we look at these three examples, what you immediately notice, and which is typical for the 1960s, is that black and white dominated until later in the decade when color films like Kodachrome did emerge and become or start to become more popular. So I'm going to focus for the 1960s look strictly on black and white, since that's what was prevalent during the 1960s. Now, what we see when we look at these images, and I recommend that you do this for images you pull and do it as well for any other kind of images you ever want to replicate, is just do some analysis first. So when we look at these, we see that they have pretty much kind of a softer contrast, maybe a soft, dreamy kind of a focus versus the really sharp kind of look that we try to go for in contemporary photography, unless you're doing very artsy things that you want to be very soft. But 60s photographs have this softer contrast. So when we're trying to replicate it, keep that in mind for trying to get the look. Another thing that we see in looking, at least in these three examples I pulled here, and I saw it pretty consistently, so that's why I kept these as examples, is there's a strong emphasis on form, so shapes are very distinct, as well as light and shadow. So you can see light and shadow, there's a lot of contrast in these images. So not only do we have the black and white, we do have pretty decent contrast in them as well. Okay, the other thing that stood out to me was the blacks in these black and white images. These are very rich, deep blacks. They're referred to as crushed. And what often happens in crushed blacks is you start losing the details. So in nowadays terms, if you look and you're looking at a histogram and the histogram is kind of creeping up the left-hand side of the histogram and the pixels are clustered down there, when it's crushed like that, you start losing details in your shadows. So that's what we're seeing here. So when we go to emulate it, we want to be sure that we are crushing the blacks with our contemporary photos that we're trying to make look older. Another thing that we see in these 1960s photos is fine to moderate film grain. And again, nowadays we talk about noise in digital photography, but it was film grain back then. And let me just look at this and blow this picture up just a little bit for you to see. So you can see, and this is not a high-res picture, but you still get the sense. Look at the grain that's in here. It's in the shadows as well as on the highlights. So we're gonna, and this is, I'd say this is somewhere between fine and moderate for this particular one. This one, I don't know if we can see it quite as much. Let's blow this up a little bit. Yeah, I see you're seeing more jaggies and stuff, but we look at the background, you can see there's grain in there too. So that one's a little bit harder to see just because it's smaller and it's relatively low res. And on this one, yeah, you can see that there's grain. I mean, so look at the arms in the background. So we definitely want to try to capture some of that grain when we are trying to replicate a 1960s look. And again, it's in the fine to moderate range, okay? The other thing that we saw with prints in that era is in the black and white prints, they tended to be square. And so you get the example from this. And again, these are actual photos from that era, not ones that I've tried to fake the look. Okay. They also, for the black and white prints, have these squared off corners on the images, so that's something to keep in mind if you're going for a look. And then there was white borders around the prints. So again, things that you can optionally try to put on your simulations that you're trying to do as well. Okay, so I think that's enough just to get us some basic kinds of considerations or qualities to try to replicate in our digital photos by looking at these photos from the 60s. So I'm going to shrink these down, and what I'm going to do is going to keep them over on the side here so we can use them for reference. So hold on just a moment while I do that. Maybe I'll just pause for a moment, then you don't have to watch me playing here. Okay, so now we're set up and ready to go here. And let me just squeeze this in a little bit so there's a more breathing room between photo that we're going to use. So this is the image that I'm going to use for my demonstration. It's a contemporary photo, it's digital photo. And I'm going to keep, as I said, these other images open from the 1960s just as reference, so we have something to help remember and gauge the different points of consideration we want to keep in mind. Okay, so the first thing you do when you're going to be working with your image is to open it, and you get it opened as a background layer in your layers panel. My layers panel is at the top. My properties panel is at the bottom, and I keep my toolbar docked right for easy convenience for using the tools. If you're really new to Photoshop, this is sort of geared for somebody beyond a real newbie beginner, but you would do a File, Open to open your image, and it would open here. Now you want to work on a copy of your image, so you can left click on the image, drag it to the bottom of the layers panel to the add new layer icon, that box with the plus, and you get a copy. Or while you're on the background layer, you can do a Control or Command J to jump up a copy that you can work on, so you're not doing anything with the original. Okay, so the first thing I want to do is convert this to a black and white to get our 60s black and white look. So before we do this step, be sure at the bottom of your toolbar that your color pickers are in the default position, which is black foreground color, white background color. You can either click on that little icon right there that will set it, or hit the D as in David or default, and that will set it so you're on your default colors. Okay, once the default color pickers are set, then we want to add a gradient map adjustment layer. So bottom of the layers panel, come to this circle with the line, which is the add new adjustment layer, left click, and come down to where it says gradient map. Left click, and you can see it automatically converts your image to a black and white. And this and the black and white adjustment layer, I think, are two of the better approaches for doing the black and white conversions. It's not, desaturating is not a very good option, so I like to use gradient map for the most part. Okay, once you have this here, you have your gradient map adjustment layer added up here, and in the associated properties panel, you have the black to gray to white gradient. Left click once on that gradient, and what it does, let me scoot this over so we can see what we're doing here. Once that you do that, you get the gradient editor. We're going to skip all the way down to the bottom where this gradient is that runs from black to gray to white. And as you can see, below the gradient are these color stop handles that you can move. Now, I'm not going to be able to give you a formula. I can see and show how it would work, or at least to my taste, how it would work on this image, but you're going to have to move these handles to taste on whatever image you're going to try to convert. So there is, as I said, no formula. So I'm going to start from the whites and start trying to get a little bit more of the brightness that I see in these sample reference images into my demo image. So I'm going to click on this little white stop and just start pulling it here. And then I just typically will pull slider handles a little distance and then release and see what I think. And you can always adjust them later. Since I'm going to adjust the midpoint or the midtones too, I might go a little bit brighter, but there is some good brightness in these, so I want to be sure there's enough brightness in mine as well. Okay, and now if you didn't notice over here on this gradient, as soon as I clicked on one of these color stop handles, this little diamond appeared. I don't know why they make it so dinky to work with, but anyway, that's how it is. So that is the midpoint between the two color stops, so you can click on that and start moving that too. So I think I might, so depending on the direction you go, if you're going from right to left, you're adding more whites. If you're going from left to right, you're adding more blacks. So I think I was going to see where I am and maybe add a little bit more black back into the midtones. It's getting a little dark, so let me, yeah, I like that better. It's still sort of in the same kind of tones as the background. This is a very blown out look here. This one and this one, I think, have more of the averaging I'm going for. All right, and just to be sure we are crushing these blacks as dark as they are in the original 60s photos, I might just pull the black color stop up very slightly. Yeah, see, I'm looking at the tires and the black and the sunglasses in here, and I think that looks like it's in the range of what these images are. So at least for now, I'm going to say this is good enough. And I'll give you the disclaimer right up front that I am not going to be perfectionist about selections and things like that as part of this demo just to keep moving. I would spend a lot more time on a personal photo. So just take the time that you need to go back and forth and get your looks and selections the way you like them. Once you get your color or your tonal balance the way you want here in the gradient, click OK up at the top of that box. Okay, and now we are set with that layer, so we're ready to go on. Now, what I have noticed is that for my image, and you may not see this in yours, so this might be an optional step. In making this black and white, the shadows in this child's face have gotten quite dark, which I don't mind the black sunglasses dark because that kind of maps to this, but we're losing more detail than I want to lose in the face. Now, you have to think the sun is coming from this direction here. You can see we're at this angle over here. So there would be a shadow being cast. So we don't want to completely open it up because that would be artificial and unrealistic. But I do want to open it up a little bit. So I am going to select the shadowed part of the child's skin and just try to brighten it up a little bit. So to do that, first of all, I'm going to make this a little bigger so I can see better what I'm working with. Okay, so it's in this area here, then I want to brighten it up a little bit. I am going to use this quick selection tool. You can use the quick selection tool or the selection brush tool if you have a newer version of Photoshop that has that. With the selection brush tool, you would just paint, but to me, it sort of bleeds a lot, and I like the fact that the quick selection tool learns where your edges are. So if you go past it and then have to come back, it starts snapping to the edges, so that's what I'm going to use. I'm making my selection tool a little bit smaller. You can see it's the white circle in the center of my green highlighter that's just there for visibility, using the left bracket key. Okay, so now I'm going to just try to capture some of this shadow area in here. I don't want to brighten up the highlight area of the child's face. I keep wanting to call them the baby. They're not really a baby, but it's a toddler. See what I mean here? It seems to learn where the edges are and just go. Okay, so again, here's where I'm going to not be perfectionist. I'll say that's good enough. I have a marching ants selection of the shadowed part of the child's face. So what I want to do is add some brightness. So bottom of the layers panel, come back to the add new adjustment layer icon, that circle with the line. Click on brightness and contrast. And we get, and I'm going to put this back to my neutral tool here, we get a new brightness and contrast adjustment layer with a mask automatically added because we had an active selection. And let me just press on Alt or Option, click on the mask to show you. So it is only going to, and any brightness adjustment we make or contrast is only going to affect the white area of the mask. Okay, and I'm just going to this up because I don't know why it made those. Okay, so that's how masks work in Photoshop. You'll only adjust the white area. Whatever is white will be revealed and whatever is black is concealed. Okay, so now I want to add a little bit of brightness. I'll click on this thumbnail icon for the brightness, and in the associated properties panel for that layer, I'm going to click on the handle for brightness and just start pulling it up till I see that skin area opening up a little bit. That's looking better. Okay, I think I'll just stop there. Maybe I'll come down just a little bit. As I said, I don't want it too opened up or it won't look realistic. And then because I cranked up the brightness, I'm going to turn the contrast down because I don't want it to be too obvious that there's a line there. So I'll just pull this to the left and do a little less contrast in this selection. All right. Now, you're still seeing this line that makes this poor child look like they've become an old person. So we want to click on that same layer that's still active with the blue highlight. Click on the mask. You know it's active if it has a white frame around it. Come back to the Properties panel, and we want a feather. So let me just show you the difference here. So this is how it looks now with the selection, very sharp edges to the mask. Okay, now I'm going to pull this feather slider and watch the image. I'm trying to make it feathered so that there's a gradual transition and that line goes away. There we go. Okay, so that has gotten rid of that distinct masking line. And if we go back and just look at the mask for a moment, you can see it has softened the transition between the two areas. So that's what the feather will do for you. Okay, so again, this was an optional step on mine. You may need to do some other touch-ups on your image before you move on. So I'd say now that that's done, I want to add a stamp layer. So with that layer still active, bottom of the Layers panel, we're going to go to the Add New Layer icon, which is the box with the plus. Get this transparent layer, which we want to fill using the claw maneuver. So that means we want to press and hold 4 keys simultaneously: the Shift, Control or Command, Alt or Option, and E. And what that does is it basically does a merge or composite of all of these previous layers into one layer. So it's almost as if you're creating a new background layer, but without collapsing layers. It's a stamp layer. Okay, now that we have the stamp layer, what we want to do is, as I mentioned, and you can see in this example here particularly, it's sort of obvious in this one too, that I mentioned that the square look was very prevalent in the 1960s, and this is definitely not a square image. So what I want to do is come to the toolbar and work with the crop tool, which looks like a little cropping bar is there. Left click on that to make that active, and you know it's active if it has black behind it. You get these outlines and handles so you can crop, and I want to crop this image to at least closer to the shape of a square. So I'm going to click on this center handle and just pull that in. Do the same on the left side of the frame. Okay, maybe I'll come down a little bit here too. And then what I want to do is I want to add a little bit more at the bottom just to, again, help with the squareness and give a little bit more balance below the child's feet. So something to keep in mind if you're not familiar or you're relatively new to Photoshop. Any of the tools in the toolbar that you use have options or settings that are related to them in this options bar across the top. For the crop tool, what it does is typically by default, it will be, and it says right here, saying transparent as the default. So that means if you were to pull this further down and release, you'll get transparency below there. I don't want transparency below there. I want to extend the image so it looks more like a square image. So the two options to do that are Generative Expand and Content Aware Fill. Generative Expand, when you use it, I would say to use it only if you have a very complex subject that you're expanding around and you need Photoshop to build something and, you know, really be smart enough to know what to replicate. If it's something relatively simple like this is pretty straightforward, then I would try first with Content Aware Fill, because Content Aware Fill will not use up your AI credits that Adobe gives you with Photoshop. So if you use Generative Expand, you will get 3 samples to look at, but you'll use up a credit, and you only have so many credits per month, and I think they're going to start charging for credits. With Content Aware Fill, you only get 1 option, but they don't debit any credits. Okay, so that's enough explanation about that. So all that being said, I'm going to leave mine on Content Aware Fill, and then I'm going to grab this handle and just pull down a little bit to make this just a little bit more square, and release. And then I'm going to click this check mark at the top of the interface and wait for it to generate. See, and I think that's really pretty good. I mean, that was a pretty simple area. Okay, so now I always go back to the lasso tool as my neutral, so you don't have to do that. So now we have the cropped, and I'm going to call this stamp layer cropped square. Okay, so now the next thing we want to do is we want to add a film grain, as I mentioned, is prevalent in these 1960s film shots. And as I said, they tend to run from fine to moderate grain, depending on the type of film that was used in that era. So I think just to be on the safe side, I'm going to left click on this, drag it to the bottom of the layers panel, and make a duplicate of that to work on. And then this will be our grain. And I'm going to do somewhere between fine to moderate. Okay. Now, the way I'm going to do this is, well, actually, I'm going to keep that as background layer, but I'm going to add a new layer that we can work on. So I'm going to add a 50% gray layer using the overlay blend mode in order to create the grain. It just occurred to me that maybe it's better to do it on the separate layer, and then we don't have to, if we want to make adjustments, it doesn't do anything to affect the actual image. So it doesn't hurt you to make this duplicate just to have it, but I'm going to add a new layer anyway. Okay, so the way we do that is, let's go up to the layer menu at the top left of the interface, right here, left click, and come down to where it says new, so layer, new, and then fly out to where it says layer and left click. So layer, new, layer, click. Okay, we get this pop-up box to create a new layer. I'm not going to name it, but we do want to change the mode to overlay. So click on this little down arrow and come down to where it says overlay and left click. And once you do that, this is no longer grayed out, this area that was grayed out before. So click to use this, click that on, put a little check mark, fill with overlay neutral color. So you want to create a new 50% gray layer. Once you do that, click OK, and we've got our new gray layer here. And this is actually the gray layer is where we're going to do the grain. I think it's better to do it that way as a separate layer. And this is just a stamp layer copy. Okay, so once we have our gray layer, then we want to convert this to a smart object. Right click in the empty area to the right there. Come down to where it says convert to smart object, left click. And you know it's a smart object if it has this little icon in the lower right corner. So now we are going to use a field blur in order to create the grain. So we go to the top of the interface to the filter menu, click on that, come down to where it says blur gallery. So filter blur gallery, and then fly out just to the first one. I think any of them would work, but since field blur is first, let's just use that. Click on that, and now we are taken into a different interface in Photoshop, as you can see. So if you look over here on the right where it says blur tools, you'll see we are in the field blur. And the first thing that we can do is we do have to add a little bit of blur. But as I said, these had kind of a soft focus anyway, so I think that suits the 1960s photos pretty well. And I'm going to make this bigger so we can see what's happening with blur and grain. Okay, so now you have two choices here. You can either use this blur slider and slide this to however much blur you want. Or you can use this little widget that appears on the image once you get into this filter. And if you just click on the little white rim there and drag, and watch as I'm dragging that, you'll see the amount of blur is appearing in that little black box. But if you also look in the upper right hand corner, you'll see it's doing the exact same thing. So if you just don't want to keep going back and forth and you want to stay more in the image, then that is a more convenient way to do it is to use this widget. All right, so I'm looking at the image and I'm seeing that looks like it's got a softer look with the 15 pixel blur, so that's good. Okay, so now we move to the grain part of this. So you can see in the lower part of the interface on the right, there's an effects tab, a motion effects tab, and noise. So you want to click on and be on the noise tab. And then there's this box below with a little down arrow, and Gaussian, uniform, and grain are the options. And you don't want uniform because that is more like what digital noise is in contemporary digital photography and digital processing. It's more uniform. It doesn't look as much like the randomness of film grain. So choose grain, and that's what you want to work with there. Okay, so now you can adjust these different settings to taste. So the amount of the noise, and you can click on the handle and just pull, and you should see it appearing here. Maybe I'll go way radical so you can see. So you see how the amount of the noise appears. And again, we're trying to stay in that fine to moderate range for 1960s. So I'm going to go maybe a little bit over what I might for myself just to be sure you see it on the video. Okay, then you can affect the size of the grain. Can you see how you have to look at the image, not the slider? Because again, this is not a formula, just do it to your own taste. All right, I'm going to leave mine there. Roughness. Again, you cannot adjust any of this. If you go into the filter gallery, you can't adjust roughness or any of this. So I'll show you that. I'll tell you about that in just a moment. All right, so I'm just looking at the roughness here and trying to figure out where I like it. Okay, so I'll leave that there. I am not going to adjust color for this black and white. And then highlights, that tells you how much of the grain you want to push into highlights in the image. And you can see that these definitely, that I showed you the examples and blew them up a bit, had grain in the highlights too. So I want to be sure that I'm getting the grain on the highlights. So I'm going to stay about 80%. Okay, so again, if I make this a little bigger, you can see there's now grain here on the face, on the child, whatever. So once you get yours the way you like, come to the top of the interface and click OK. All right, and now we are returned to the layer stack and the usual Photoshop interface. And if I turn off the eye icon for that layer, you can see we have added a grain effect. Okay. Now, by using this and sending this to that blur filter, the field blur, as a smart object, what we've done is a couple things. By doing the smart object, it means you can go back in and make corrections or changes if you want to without starting over. So that's a positive thing. The other thing is you can see what it has done is it has sent back two sublayers along with the initial launch layer that we went into that blur filter. Okay, so you have a mask. So if you want to paint away or hide any of the grain that's anywhere on your image, I don't know why in this context you would do that, because a film wouldn't do that. It would be across the whole image, but you have a mask. So if you want to mask something, you can. Also, it says blur gallery. So if you double click on those words blur gallery, it takes you back in and to the settings that you made. So if you want to make adjustments, again, you don't have to start over again. You've got the settings that you had just worked with if you want to tweak any one of them or all of them. I'll just hit cancel because we don't want to change that there. Now, I said there is an alternative way that you can use to create film grain, but it's less flexible and controllable than this approach I showed you. So the other alternative is to go up to the filter menu again at the top of the interface, come down to the filter gallery, and go to the artistic category, and then go to film grain here. But you see, you don't have as many settings. There's a grain setting, whether you can push it into the highlight areas or the intensity. So I really prefer the method that I just showed you rather than that. The method I showed was going through the filter blur gallery and then field blur, and then you have more kinds of control over the types or appearance of the grain. Okay. All right, so we went through the sublayers. So now I am ready to, at least for my image, get this a little smaller so we can see the whole image again. I want to add a little bit less contrast, because again, I think this is looking still a little bit contemporary in terms of the sharpness of it. So bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer icon, that circle with the line, brightness and contrast. I'm going to click on the thumbnail icon for brightness and contrast. And in the associated properties panel, I want to lessen the contrast. So let me click on that handle and pull it to the left to make it less contrast. To the right would be more contrast. Okay, and then maybe I'll just give it a little bit of a brightness boost, very, very slight. I'll pull it to the right for more contrast. Yeah. Okay, I think that's good enough for my image. And again, you can decide for yours when you work with your own image whether you want to add any more adjustments like that. Okay, so now again, I'm going to add another stamp layer from the bottom of the layers panel, add new layer icon, box with the plus, and then do that claw movement, shift, controller command, alter, option, and E all at the same time for a stamp layer. Okay, and you could be finished right here. So this could be all you need to do to get your 1960s kind of a look. So let's just go back to the original for a moment, and you'll see, because I expanded the bottom, that it has the extra transparency down there. Okay, so there's our original contemporary photo, and there is more of the 1960s black and white look. Okay, so that's what's taken us up to there. Now, as I said, you can stop right there if you want to. Let me show you two more optional things you can do to perhaps enhance the 1960s replicated look. So one is, when you look at these images here, at least when I look at them, I don't see a really purely white kind of a look. There's, slight discoloration, probably from aging. There might have been a more pure black and white at the time. But if you want it to look like it's a retro picture that's been sitting around, then I'm going to try to mimic this a little bit more. So to me, there's a slight yellowish cast to this. It's not a perfectly white. So optionally, if we want to add the yellow cast to this image that we're working on in the demo, what I personally would do is to simulate that discoloration is bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer, and I'm going to look for photo filter. Here it is. So bottom of the layers panel, add new photo filter adjustment layer, left click. Okay, and that's an actively added new layer. And then what I'm going to look at is in this box where it says warming filter, I'm going to click that down arrow, and I'm just going to come down to where it says yellow and left click on that. So in the photo filter, I'm sort of hitting their preset for yellow. Okay, and now it has overlaid a more yellowed look on this. So to me, this looks a little bit too yellow, but you might want to do this. I mean, if this looks like what you think looks like older pictures, then you choose what you want. But you control this with the density slider. So I'm just going to start pulling this till it's as subtle as some of these. And as I said, I just do slider pulls, very short hops, until I see what I want to see. And sometimes I go past where I want to be and then come back again. Yeah, that went more white again. All right. I think that's pretty close. When I'm looking at this kind of look in here to this, for me, that's closer. And it should be pretty subtle. Yeah, see, you can see it. Just look at the water too. Okay. All right, and then another thing that we can do is we can add that white frame. So I think what I'm thinking to myself what I want to do. So I think I'm going to add another stamp layer just as a buffer to put it all together. So bottom of the layers panel, add new layer icon, the box with the plus, do the stamp maneuver, shift, control or command, alt or option plus E all at the same time. Okay, and now what I want to do is add the white frame as an optional step and see if that gives it a little bit more of a 60s look too. Okay, now what I would suggest, in order to do this, I flatten the image, meaning you flatten down all of these layers until it looks like it was an original background layer again. You might not want to flatten until you do a save. I personally would recommend doing a save because if you decide you want to make any revisions to the image, then you've lost all your layers and you'd have to start all over again. So personally, I would highly recommend that you do a save before flattening and creating the white border. So to do that and to save the layers, you go up to the upper left to File, Save As, and then down here, you can give it a file name, whatever you want to call your image, but save as type is what's important. You want to use the Photoshop, so let me show you the expandable menu. It's up at the top. You want to save it as a Photoshop PSD file, okay? So that you will maintain your layers. I'm just going to cancel because I don't need to save it for mine. Then if you need to reopen this image and modify some of these layers, you'll have all the layers to work with. But for me, I am just going to flatten it for purposes of the demo because I don't need to save mine. All right, so in this layers panel, go all the way to the right to where you see that little hamburger menu, the little stack of lines. Left click on there and come down to where it says flatten image and left click on that. And look, it has collapsed all your layers to a new locked background layer. So that's what I'm telling you. You don't want to lose all that by not saving the layers, okay? So now let's do a copy like we did before. So this time I'll do a Control or Command J to jump it up. So this is a copy. And I said the alternative is to just left click and drag it down to the box with the plus, okay? All right, so now we've duplicated the background layer. Now we want to go to the image menu up at the upper left, image. Come down to canvas size right here. Left click, and you get this pop-up box to just the canvas size. And it shows you what the current size of this canvas, that's what this is referring to as the canvas is, and then you can set what you want the new size to be. Now I just want to point out I have mine set to inches because I can look in inches is meaningful to me in terms of increasing the size of something. If that is not intuitive to you, you can click the little down arrow and change it either to some kind of metric or to pixels if you prefer to work with pixels, whatever you prefer, but I'm going to leave mine on inches. And to get that kind of white border, I am just going to only add 1 inch to each of these dimensions. So I'll change this from 14 to 15. And I'll change this one from 12 to 13. Okay. And then for yours, I do not check relative. So relative will add a lot on and it'll be a lot wider border. So if you're going to do something not related to retro photography and you're just working with some of your own photos and you want to create a really nice wide white matte or some other color matte border around your image, you might want to check relative and then make a wider border, but not for purposes of something where you want a narrow border. Keep your anchor point in the center, like mine, and then choose what you want your canvas extension color to be. And I want mine to be white, so that's all ready to go. Okay, and you can click on that or change it to some other color by clicking on that if you like. I want white, because that's what was typical for the 1960s. And click OK. And there we go. So now we have a more square photo that's black and white, that has the film grain, that has these really deep blacks, crushed blacks in it with the narrow white border. And we have the film grain in there that you can see. So it gives it a little bit more of replicating the 1960s look. Okay. So that is the end of demo number 1, where we've tried to create a 1960s photo aesthetic. And I'm going to pause the video and get set up, because demo number 2, I will do a similar type of walkthrough for 1970s retro photo look. Hold on. Okay, so now this will be demo number 2, in which I'll show how to create a 1970s era or decade retro photo look. Again, I will start with analyzing these 4 actual photos from that time period, sample photos, to try to replicate the kind of look that these film photos show us. Okay, so again, we'll start with just a brief analysis of what we're going to be aiming for in the process that we want to walk through. So as you can see, by the end of the 60s and into the 70s, color photography gained prominence, and was still certainly very popular during the 70s. And as the affordability of film was improved, then more and more people started taking color photos. In fact, there was a movement that was during the 1970s called the New American Color Movement, and that took hold. And what was typical of the art in the photography in that movement was very vibrant, intense, rich colors, but that were somewhat desaturated. And so the way I differentiate between vibrance and saturation is that vibrance is very vivid, very bright. You can see that in these colors here, but saturation talks more about the purity of the color. So if you take away a little bit of the saturation, you're kind of messing with, or, taking away from the purity of the color. So it can be not a pure, true color, but it can be very bright and vivid. So we have the vibrance in the 70s, but a little bit of desaturation or a little less purity of the colors, okay? Now, when we look across these sample images, and I did try to pull ones that I thought were representative without violating anybody's licensing terms or conditions. So these are publicly available images. You can see that what we see are a lot of earthy hues. So look at the colors that are in this. It's very earthy browns, oranges, mustard colors, avocado greens. So it's the same colors if you're old enough to know or remember the kitchen appliances in that same 1970s era. So very earthy kind of tones. As we look at this and look at this one, but certainly it's easier to see here in those older photos. And again, it could just because the colors were degrading, but I think part of it is how the film captured it too. The skin tones skew very red. So that will be something to think about when we want our newer images to look old, is if there's skin in them to try to capture that kind of a look. Again, I think there tended to be, from the images I saw, a yellowish, you can see it certainly there, or a greenish, there's a little bit of a greenish photo cast to the images. And I think those casts, those color casts, tended to give the reds a little bit more of a perception of an orangey red. So between sort of the lack of saturation and then the color cast, it wasn't just a pure red that we're seeing here. As far as the tonality, when I look at these, you don't see that crushed blacks that we saw, as I showed you in the 1960s example. In these, you start seeing, look at the tires here and look at, some of the other colors in here. This has some deep, rich blacks, but you tended to get a lot more lifted or faded blacks in the 1970s. And you didn't see, if you look at this and look at some of the whites in here, they're not pure whites. They're creamy sort of whites, so yellowish kinds of whites. Noticeably more grain in the 1970s than we saw with the fine to moderate grain, the very fine grain in the 1960s. In the 70s, it was definitely noticeably more grainy, and I'd say there's more moderate grain overall. Okay, and then the difference that we see from the 1970s and the 1980s, we'll see the 1980s in my next video, is that in the color prints, so you didn't see it so much in the black and white prints, but in the color prints, you started getting these rounded edges or rounded corners. Okay, see this and this one. This one didn't have it. This is by Stephen Shore, by the way. So if we want to add the white borders again, like we did in our 1960s emulation, then probably the thing to do would be to round the corners a little bit to make it look more like a 1970s photo. Okay, so I think that is enough analysis about what it is we're going to try to copy or to emulate. Again, I'm going to pause the video for a moment, shrink these down, keep them on the side as reference images, and we'll work with the same demo images before just to see if we can get different looks with the same photo. So let me just pause this for a moment. Okay, all right, so now we're set up and ready. We have our reference images here, and so we can go through the step-by-step Photoshop workflow to try to convert this contemporary image to more of a 1970s replicated photo look. Okay, so let's keep these here for reference, and let's go. So we've got our image opened as the background image over here that we want to duplicate and work on a copy. So bottom of the layers panel, left click and drag to the new layer icon, or do a Control or Command J to jump up a copy to work on there. All right. Now, the first thing I want to do in this process, which is different than the last, is to add a curves adjustment layer. And as I said, the blacks are lifted in this 1970s look. So I want to add a curves layer, bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer. That's the circle with the line. Come down to curves, and there's the curves adjustment layer, and the associated properties panel is right here with the curve that runs from black to whites and blacks to whites. So I want to work, or we want to work with this point down in the corner where it's the blacks, okay? And it's saying, you're calling it lifting the blacks because, see, you're lifting it from black up towards white. So you're making it less black and more hazy. So let's watch the image and see. And again, not a formula. You just watch your own image and decide when it looks like it's got a hazier, lifted look for you. For me, that's pretty good relative to looking at the tires over here. Okay, and then I want to do the same kind of thing. I want to lower the whites a little bit. So come to the opposite end of the curve, click on that handle, and just start pulling down. And again, watching the image. And again, I'm trying to look relative to the sample images. And we'll be making more adjustments on this because you can see this is definitely not in the color palette of those warm earthy tones. So we're going to have to adjust that too. Okay, so I think this is a good starting point to get it that hazier look. So now I want to start going more towards these. Look at all the reds and the earthy tones here. So I want to start moving my sample image towards the reds. So the next thing I'm going to do from the layers panel is add another adjustment layer with a photo filter. So bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer, the circle with the line, down to photo filter. And there's always multiple ways to do things in Photoshop. So if you are familiar with different tools, you can experiment, but I'm just walking you through one process. Okay, so again, we want to move this towards the reds or the browns. And so I need to, red is the closest thing I have here to start moving me towards those browns. So I'm going to click on this little down arrow, and I'm going to click on red. And this is skewing a little bit magenta, but you can see it's gotten a little bit more of a brownish look to it. So I want to lessen the redness of this, so lessen the density. Go to the left. We're not going to accomplish this all in one step. Again, not a formula. You just sort of watch your image and see if it's giving you a look you like. It's very experimental, trial and error. Let me see what that did. Yeah, see, so you can see it took it from the bluey to more into the brown range. Okay, so that's good. I feel happy with that as a first step. So now the next thing I want to do is try to put more reds or brownish colors into the shadows. So bottom of the layers panel, I'm going to add a color balance adjustment layer. So click on that icon. I'm down to color balance, left click. Got our color balance layer. So now we're going to work in the properties panel for that layer. And I want to put the darkness into the shadows. So where it says tone and come across to the down arrow, you have a choice of working with the shadows, midtones, or highlights. And you can put it in any one you want when you're making adjustments. I'm going to put into the shadows for mine. So I want to, again, increase the reds. We're getting towards the browns. So I'll pull this towards the reds. It might be a bit much. Let's see. Okay, and if you can't with your, I'm using a mouse here, if you can't just get it precisely where you want, you can highlight that box and then just use your up and down arrow keys to get it to where you want. All right, so I think, again, when you see these colors here, and especially I look at their hair too, I think I'm going to put a little bit of magenta in this, so I'm going to just move it closer to the greenish tint, but still in the magenta. Oop, too much green. That's good. All right, and then the other thing is I want to take down the yellows because again, I want it less saturated with the yellows. So on this yellow and blue slider, I'm going to go to the left or towards the yellows. As you can see that, as I said, there's a creamier, yellower look. So I want to go more towards the yellows and a hint of that greenish. Okay. So now what I want to do is I want to darken this up because again, I'm trying to get this more towards browns and these earthy tones. This is still very light. So I want to see what blend mode up here in the layers panel. So the blend modes are under the default is normal. And if you click on that little down arrow, you see all the different blend modes and all you have to do is just hover over them. And they change. It's darken this. Ah, see, there we go. Okay, so multiply. So I wanted to stay either in this category here or in this category here somewhere. And this is too orangey, so I don't like that now. So I want to go to multiply. And obviously that's very dark. So then what I'm going to do is come across right adjacent to multiply is opacity. So if it's too much, you just reduce the opacity of what you have applied. So you can either click this little down arrow and pull a slider, or you can do what I prefer to do, which is just left click on the word opacity and drag. Again, I'll do it in bits till I see where I am and what I like. And everything is to taste, so you just sort of watch your image. And you might not agree with mine, but that's why you can get this image to practice with or try your own. Let's see what that did. Yeah, much better. See, so we're getting into this darker, browner kind of look here, which is what I am going for. Okay, good. All right, so let's just say that's good enough for demo purposes. Is just so you know, you can play with the color balance and you can do it in either the shadows You can have different settings according to shadows, midtones, or highlights, and I worked with the shadows for mine. Okay. So now, again, as I said, these clothes and even this green are just too saturated and different colorways than what we saw in the 1970s. So what I want to do is select her clothing and change the color of it. Okay, so I am going to, first of all, make her a little bit bigger. Let's see what I'm doing here. And I think what I'm going to try to do to make the selection is use the object selection tool here. Now, if you want to paint, you could do something like the quick selection tool or the selection brush tool, but I think it might be faster to use the object selection tool. And again, as I said, all of these tools have their own options or settings associated with them. So in the options bar across the top of the interface for that object selection tool, you have a choice of using a lasso or a rectangle, and I'm going to leave mine set to the lasso. Okay, so now I'm just going to start tracing around, close. I do it just loosely, just outside. Hopefully Photoshop will snap to the close. Okay, and then if you get areas that you don't want, like this is done, then that's when I would switch to the quick selection tool. And I'm going to use the Alt or Option key to, so if you can see in the center of the white part, here I'll just hit the right bracket to make it bigger so you can see, there's a plus sign in there. That means you'll add to the selection. And this already has too much, so we want to subtract from the selection, okay? So let me use the left bracket key, make that a little smaller again. And you would press Alt or Option to change that to a minus, see? So you can take away. And then you just paint till it clings to the areas you want. I'm taking away from her skin and from here. And I'm just painting over slowly, hoping that the selection snaps to where I want it to be. Okay. And yeah, this grabbed her legs, and we don't want her legs. I'm just changing the clothing color. Whoops. As I said at the beginning, I won't be too perfectionist about selections. I don't want to get it close. All right, so that's her clothes down there, and we don't want to change face. Subtract from the face, add to the clothes. Okay, I think we've got mostly the clothing here now, so let's just say we're good. And we got the clothing. All right, so now we want to add a hue and saturation layer in order to change the color of her clothes. So bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer, come to hue and saturation right there, left click. We've got our hue and saturation layer, and because we had that active marching ants selection, it has automatically added a mask to only make adjustments to the white areas. And let me just quick grab paintbrush tool and be sure that it captured everything in here. Okay, so that's just my monitor and not that. So we're only going to be working on her clothes when we change the hue and saturation here, okay? All right, so now we're going to come to the properties panel for that layer that's associated with that active layer, and we're going to the hue slider, and I'll just start sliding it and see which way it goes. And you can see if you watch her, oh, it's actually pretty good because it matches the kind of colors I see over here, and those earthy tones and the avocados and whatever. See, that's actually not bad. I'm gonna leave it there, maybe 59. All right, I'll leave mine there. Okay, so now I also want to, as I said, these are less saturated than pure colors. So I want to reduce the saturation a little bit here too with the saturation slider. There, that's pretty good. I'm sort of looking at the yellows over here just to get a sense, not that I have to perfectly match it, but, and then the lightness, I want to be sure it's not too washed out. So let's see if I want to go darker light. That's not bad. Yeah, so that's pretty good. Okay, so let's say that is good enough for her clothing. Then I think we want to do the same thing because this is such a vibrant, not only vibrant, but also a highly saturated green, and it's not in the sort of avocado-y, or the kind of era colors of green. This looks more contemporary. So again, I think I want to use my object selection tool from the toolbar. I'm over here on the right if you're looking for my highlighter with the green highlighter. And I just want to, so yes, go loosely around the outside of the wagon, and maybe I'll just grab the hitch here also because that's very intense yellow. Let's see where it grabs. There we go. That's good enough. Okay, so I'll do the same kind of thing. I'm going to add a hue and saturation adjustment layer. So bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer, hue and saturation. So we're going through the exact same process that we did for changing the clothing, only this time it's only the wagon and the what I call a hitch, the connector there, that will be affected. Okay. So I want to change the hue. Right? Yeah, we're getting away from that pure green. Okay, and then the saturation definitely needs to come down. Duller color, yeah. We just make it even 25. All right, so that's sort of dulled down. It's not that pure, vibrant green, I don't think that it was before. And then we'll lighten it up so it has more a little the hazy look. Give it a little more saturation there. Okay, so let's say that's good enough. So we've modified it from a more of a contemporary, pure, vibrant, sharp-looking color for the wagon in this too. And again, just look at the objects in your scene and decide if there's anything else that needs to be adjusted from a hue and saturation layer adjustment perspective. Okay, so now that we've gotten the colors a little bit better, we're still not entirely, we started tiptoeing towards the browns and the earthiness here in my first couple steps, but we're still not quite to what we're seeing from the actual 1970s photo here. So what I think I want to try to do is add more of an overall brownish cast to this image. So bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer. I'm going to come down to the gradient map again. Click on this, and this time, so I'm just ignoring the black and white. We're not going to go to black and white. This time I'm looking up at some of these presets up at the top of the gradient editor. And I see, there are a variety of different browns here. So let me just click on one of these browns. And again, you can see that we have the color stops that we can adjust if we want to, but I think I'm not going to bother with those. I'm just going to click OK and get this overall brown on here. So let's just see how this goes, all right? And so we've gotten sort of this sepia antique gradient for browns on here. So now what I want to do is I want to blend it with what we've done before. So to do so and blend this brown into what was there before, I want to, in the top of the layers panel, want to come to the blend modes again. So click on that down arrow. And typically for something like this, I think you'd want to use either an overlay or a soft light. And I am not as much a fan. If you like much more harsh or statementy kinds of blending, then definitely go for overlay. I tend to like more the soft light, so I will use soft light for my blend mode. And then this is still very intense, but you can see it's taken us into this brown range. So again, I'm going to come right across to opacity and lower the opacity by left clicking and dragging across the word opacity. Watching the image. Yeah, so I think that gets me, without it being completely muddy, I think that gets me. So with the eye, if I click the eye icon off, that's how it was with all those other treatments. And then this is how it is with it on. So I'm going to keep that because I think it gives it just enough earthiness to be closer to these actual 70s photographs. Okay, so now the next thing that we want to do is the skin, because when we look at the skin, as I pointed out in the analysis, either time has affected it or just the nature of the films in that era, the skin tended to be redder. So I want to add a little more redness to this child's skin here. So let's select her skin. And again, I'm going to use the object selection tool. Do that, I think. Let's see how that works. Right, we've got that from the toolbar. We've got the object selection tool active with the black behind it. I've got it set to lasso, so I'm just going to draw a little closed lasso just outside skin. You have to be sure you close the loops to get the marching ants selection. Okay, so now we've got all the skin areas selected. So now what I want to do is work on a little bit more of the color balance. So take this off of here. Bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer, come down to color balance. And we've got our mask that was created, so we'll only be affecting the skin, which is the white areas on the mask. And for this, I think what I want to do is probably just work with the midtones given tonality here. Oh, so it's already on midtones, so that's good. And so the properties, so here we've got our color balance layer. It's set to tones, midtones, and in the properties panel we have the different sliders we can work with, and I want to make this a little bit more red. So I'm going to pull this slider towards the reds. Release as I go. You can see it's getting more red. Okay, let me just see where we are here. Yep, so you can see that definitely made it more red. Okay, and so now let's do magentas a little bit more towards the greenish tones. Right, and then go more towards the yellows. We want to bring back a little bit so it's not flaming red like she got super sunburned. There's an oranginess to everything here too. So with the red and the yellow, we'll get an orangier look. That's too yellow. It's not bad. Okay, I'm going to say that's pretty close to what we have there. And again, it doesn't have to be exact, but we're just trying to get the essence of the look. Okay, so now that we've gotten the child's skin adjusted so it looks more like the 70s kind of reddish skin look, the next thing I want to do is add another stamp layer here. So Shift, Controller, Command, Alt, or Option, and E all at the same time. And now we want to go to adding the moderate, so I'll just call this stamp layer. See if you look at it layered, you won't wonder what I was doing there. Okay. So now we want to add the grain to this just because, and as I mentioned in the analysis part, it was much more of a moderate grain. It was a more intense grain than some of what we saw in the 1960s. There was some moderate, but there also was fine. It tended to be more moderate grain in the 1970s. So with that layer active, we're going to go up to the upper part of the interface to the layer menu, new, layer, new, layer. So layer, new layer, click. And we get our new layer box. We want to do the same thing that we did in demo number 1, which is change the mode. And you can see this is grayed out here. So we need to change the mode to overlay in order to be able to fill with the neutral gray color. So click on that to fill with neutral gray. Click OK. We get our gray layer here. And then this is going to be our moderate grain. Okay, and then once you get that, you want to convert that to a smart object. Right click in the open area, convert to smart object. Our little icon that says it's now a smart object. Now we want to go to the filter menu, top of the interface. I'm down to blur gallery right here. And we're going to do field blur like we did in demo number 1. And that takes us to the field blur and the whole blur field blur the whole blur gallery interface. All right, and again, we want to adjust the amount of blur here. So let me make this bigger so I can see what we're doing and see what happens with the grain. And you can either move this little widget here or move the slider up at the upper right. I think how blurry is that? I think 4 or 5 pixels is probably enough blur. Okay, so now I want to come down to the lower section and be sure we're clicked onto the noise tab, and that grain is the choice. So not Gaussian or uniform, be sure it's on grain. And I want to adjust each of these categories except for color. So let me start moving this. And again, I'm aiming for a moderate grain this time with the 1970s look. That might be too much. All right, let me leave it around there. Then try size. You can see how it'll adjust if you pull it. To be sure it's enough that it's visible. Right, why don't I leave it at 45? And then, as I said, roughness we're going to use, but we're not going to use color. I guess I feel like if I do too much, I can always reduce the opacity. Might be getting a little intense there. All right, let's leave it around 80. And then skip color, and then the highlights. I definitely want to push it into the highlights, but not as much as it is here. That's a bit much. It's not bad. Right, why don't I leave that there? Okay, so now I've got, when you get yours set to the kind of grain that you like the look of in yours, make this color, then you'd come to the top of the interface and click OK in that box. And by the way, I don't know if you noticed, but up there next to where I was clicking OK, there's a little box that says Preview, and I definitely keep that clicked on so I can see what is happening when I'm in that interface. All right, so now we have returned to the Photoshop interface with the moderate grain on the image. You can see it's added that look. Again, you get the mask, so if you want to mask off any areas, but I don't know why you would. If you're taking pictures with cameras, it wouldn't be masked off. And again, if you double click on the words Blur Gallery, it will take you back into the Blur Gallery so that you could make modifications without starting over. And that's a benefit of doing the Smart Object before you go into that filter. Okay, so let's see here. So now I guess the next thing I would think about, let me get out so I can see what we're doing here, is what? When I look at these, they have a little bit more contrast than maybe I have here right now. So maybe just a hint of more contrast to differentiate my subject from the background. So bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer icon, that circle with the line. And I am going to use, I think, curves this time, just to show you different ways to achieve these things. Okay, so we've got our new curves adjustment layer, and in the properties panel associated with that layer, we have different presets. So let me click on the down arrow, and you can try these. It's not a hover over, so you can try them. So let's just try linear contrast and say, yeah, see, I like the look of that. So it's already sort of pre-done for you, so you don't have to turn this off. So you can see it's just giving it a little bit more pop and contrast, which I like. Now maybe I'll dial it back just a little bit, but I think it also helps the grain stand out a little bit. So again, in the layers panel, left clicking on the word opacity, I think I'll just dial it back a little bit. Yeah, I like that. Okay, so let's say that's good enough. Mine might need a little bit more brightness since I added that brownish to it, because these all seem to be brighter. So you can decide for your image that you're working with whether you want to optionally do something like that, or even any other adjustments. So let's just say, well, we're going to bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer, brightness. And let me just add a little bit of brightness to this image. Maybe just even a little bit more contrast. Yeah, it just perks it up a little bit. Okay, so that helped to add that brightness layer here, adjustment layer. All right, so let's see where we are at. So I think theoretically, you could be finished here with your 70s look if you wanted to just stop here after those series of steps. So here is the before. Here is the more 1970s look version. Okay. So you could really stop at that point if you wanted to, and I'll just do another stamp layer just to finish it up there. But again, you could optionally do what we see here happening in the 1970s. So if you want to go on and try to do a little bit more of how the 1970s color prints looked, then we can try to get these rounded corners and the white border around the image that we're trying to use to replicate the look. So let's work on the rounded corners first, because we'll have to flatten to do this. So what I would suggest that you do is, again, same thing I said for demo number 1. We've put in a lot of work getting to this point and making all the various adjustments. So I highly suggest that before you do these optional steps, you save this as a layered file, that if you want to go back and make adjustments after you see it together, you can do that without starting over. So again, you would go to the File menu, Save As, left click, and come down to where it says Save As Type. So you give it whatever name you want to give it, and then Save As Type. Be sure that you are using Photoshop PSD as your option. So once you give it a name and make sure that you have chosen that file type, then you would hit Save. I'm hitting Cancel because I'm not going to save mine. So I'm just going to flatten this. So in the Layers panel, across to that hamburger menu, left click, come down to where, after you've done the save, come down to Flatten Image, and it's now a new background. So let me just do a Control or Command J to make a copy of that background to work with. Okay, so now first let's try to add the rounded corners here, which we see in the 1970s and also in the 1980s. So what we want to do is work with the rectangle tool from the toolbar. So again, your toolbar might be on the left, mine is docked right. I also like to play around. So I've got a little banana here. You probably will see 3 dots. So you would click there and then right click to where there's a little arrow there, so you can see all the different tools that are available. And here is the one that's called the rectangle tool. So you want to work with that. So left click, and it will show up as the active tool there is the rectangle tool. It's got the black behind it. So you know the rectangle tool is active. Again, just like every tool in the toolbar, it has certain options, and the options bar is across the top. So be sure that in your options bar for that rectangle tool, you have this box set to path. You don't want it on shape or pixels. Be sure it's on path, and then come all the way over so that you can get the curve radius. There's the curve, and I recommend using 50 to 60 pixels if you want to get soft corners. I have mine on 60, but you can try anywhere between 50 and 60 and see if you like how that looks for you, if you want those soft curves around the edges of your image. Okay, so now we're going to click in the upper left and then drag down to the lower right to create the rectangle. All right, and again, I'm not going to worry about being a perfectionist about this. There are different alignment tools you can use if you want to. Okay, and release. So click, drag, release, and then it automatically puts this pink bounding box with these various handles, and then the anchor point is in the center. And what we're going to pay attention to are these little blue circles. So I'm just going to grab one of them and start pulling diagonally towards the center of the image to pull the corner in. Okay? So you can do it a lot. You can do it a little. So to me, looking at the ones from the 70s, it's kind of just a subtle curve and then release. So you can see the blue line shows that it did it on all those different corners. Okay, so once you get that pulled in, then we have to go to a different panel. So over here on the right side of the interface, we're going to move from the Layers panel over to the Paths panel. So click on that tab that says Paths. We go, that's the Paths panel. If you don't see that, go to the window menu at the top of your interface and come down and just click on paths to be sure that it's open, okay? So now that we are in the paths panel, you come to the bottom of the panel and we want to click on this little dashed circle icon, which is what's going to convert that path to a selection. So left click on that, okay? And now you have your marching ant selection, and you can see it's showing the rounded edges. So now we want to come back to the layers panel, and with our thumbnail for the image active, we want to come to the bottom of the layers panel and click on the add layer mask icon, which is this rectangle with the circle. Left click. And now we've added the mask, and let me just alter option here to show you. We have the mask that is showing the rounded corners, and the black, it's blocking out the corners, okay? So we got just what we wanted with the mask. I am going to turn off the eye icon to the visibility to the background because you can see we've got the transparency. You can see I didn't do this perfectly, but that's why I said take more time and line yours up properly for your image. So as you know, in Photoshop, anything where that as you go further up, it blocks out what's below. So if something higher up has a transparency on it, you will see what's below, and that's why you're seeing the corners when it's on, is because you can see through the transparency to whatever is below. Okay, so now we have this icon, we have this image with the rounded corners. So now we want to add the white border just like we did in the 1960s photo. Okay, this time we had to do this extra step. So we're going to go up to Image menu, Canvas Size, Image, Canvas Size, left click. We get the Canvas Size dialog box here, and it shows what the current size is. So we want to increase it by 1 each, at least I do. So if you want it more for yours, do whatever you like. So it's currently 18. I want to increase it to 19. So I'm just highlighting it and typing 19 to increase it. Same thing, I'm highlighting 12 with my mouse, and then I'm typing 13 to increase it. I leave relative off because I don't want it to be a super huge border. I'm keeping the anchor point in the center for where it's adjusting from. And again, I'll just leave this on white and click OK. All right, so now what it has done, as you can see, is because there was a transparency, it has increased the size of the transparency where we can put a white border. So we didn't have a transparency in the 1960s image, so it had just increased and added a border of white. So now we need to add white to fill the transparency. So bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment layer icon, circle with the line, and we just want solid color. Oh, so before we do that, let me first of all change this to white as the foreground color, because then it will just make it white when it opens. Okay, so bottom of the layers panel, add new adjustment, solid color. Oops, it did the opposite of what I wanted. Oh well. So we can change it to white. Because we've got the mask, sorry. All right. And so thinking in terms of solid colors versus with the mask there. Okay, so now, as I said, where you have a transparency, it will show through to what's below. So you want to left click and drag that layer to below so it shows through the transparency. And now you have white as your border around, okay? So again, I can't show you the before and after because we had flattened that image, but now we have our 1970s look image with the more rounded corners that was typical of color prints for that era. Again, the black and white tended to stay still with the squared off corners, and then we have the white border around that. So, and we've got our grain, we've got our desaturated yet vibrant colors, we've got the reddish skin. So hopefully this looks like something that could have been from a 1970s era. So that is the end of demo number 2 on how to create a retro 1970s photographic look. So in summary, in this part 1 video, I provided a brief analysis of the different film photo looks for each of the areas of the 1960s and the 1970s, and then showed step by step how to use Photoshop to simulate the look of those decades from a photo film look. In my part 2 video, which will be a separate video, I'll follow the same processes in terms of analysis and then step by step, but I will do it for the 1980s and 1990s photo film looks, which is still different than what we saw here. So anyway, I hope you have fun experimenting with ways to modify your contemporary photos and perhaps give them a little bit more retro looks too. So take care and enjoy.